Hey there, and welcome to today's Explainer. I am so thrilled you're here with us because we're going to be digging into a highly focused and honestly kind of quirky legal concept today. If you're a beginner studying business law, you are absolutely going to love how straightforward this is once we break it down. So let's just jump right into this unique concept.
Picture this for a second. You're just sitting at home, chilling, and suddenly there's a knock at the door. A delivery driver hands you a shiny new package. Awesome, right? But there's a catch. You never actually ordered it. So what happens next? If you decide to just quietly accept that product, are there actual rules that govern that? This super relatable, real-world scenario is literally the perfect way to understand our topic today.
Now, in the world of business law, this exact scenario falls under a very specific term. It's called a quasi-contract. And the strict definition states exactly this. A quasi-contract is a situation where a party might have entered a contract without any legality or by mistake, making them responsible for losses they created. Okay, I know, that might sound like a bunch of legal jargon right out of the gate, but don't worry, we're going to break that exact sentence down step by step so it makes total sense.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that we are looking at authentic, handwritten study notes. See right there in the middle, under point 3? You'll spot the exact definition of a quasi-contract that we literally just read. So let's use this as our map to unpack all that legal jargon.
Okay, let's dive into this definition, starting with that very first part, entering a contract without any legality. In really simple terms, this just means there was zero formal paperwork, no signature, no handshakes, and absolutely no intentional agreement made beforehand between the two parties. Usually a contract requires a deliberate offer and an acceptance. But here, that whole formal legal setup is completely missing.
Then, the next part of the definition adds, or by mistake. And honestly, this is the real core of how a quasi-contract comes to life. It relies on a genuine error happening. Just like our opening scenario, imagine a delivery driver simply reading an address wrong and dropping a shiny, valuable box off at the wrong house. The company didn't intend to give you free stuff, and you certainly didn't intend to buy it. It was just an honest, if kind of awkward, mistake.
So, the crucial point is the final part of our definition, being responsible for losses they created. Why does this even matter? Well, the law steps in here to ensure basic fairness. You can't just keep a valuable mistake for free if it ultimately costs someone else, like the original sender, their hard-earned money. If you benefit from the mistake and keep the goods, the law says, hey, you are responsible for making the other party whole so they don't suffer an unfair loss.
All right, let's transition back to our opening scenario for a second and apply the 3 pieces of the definition we just unpacked. So, you get a package you didn't order. There was no legal agreement. That's the without any legality part. It arrived at your door because of a shipping error. That's the by mistake part. So what triggers that final piece? How does the actual responsibility kick in?
Well, the trigger is your action. If a person accepts any product which was not ordered by them, they have to bear the legal consequences. By deciding to accept and actually keep that unordered product, you essentially lock in the quasi-contract. Even without a signature, your action of taking the benefit means you must bear those legal consequences, and that generally means, yep, you have to pay for the value of what you kept.
Let's move to and see how this builds into the bigger picture of business law. Where do quasi-contracts actually fit in? Well, contracts are categorized on the basis of formation into 3 types. First, express contracts. Those are your spoken or written ones. Second, implied contracts, which are understood by common actions, kind of like paying a bus fare. And third, right there at the bottom, is our quasi-contract, the accidental agreement enforced by law purely for fairness.
Now, as a beginner studying business law, this 3-part framework is exactly what you need to know. The boundary of our study material keeps it super simple and stops right here. We don't need to dive into centuries of complex historical case law today. Understanding these 3 basic categories gives you the solid foundation you need to grasp how agreements are formed, whether entirely on purpose or by total accident.
To wrap up our explainer today, I really want to leave you with this thought. If the law didn't step in to enforce these accidental quasi-contracts, who would ultimately pay the price for honest mistakes? It kind of forces us to think deeply about the underlying fairness of business law, doesn't it? It's not just about strict rules and signatures. Sometimes it's simply about making sure nobody gets unfairly taken advantage of just because of a simple error. Thanks so much for joining me to explore this fascinating topic.